What's up guys, we're back in the shop today, gonna put the dirt bike motor back together. Got my new transmission gear here for 5th gear, so we're gonna replace that. Then I got the cases all cleaned up and the seals pressed in, so we'll assemble it today. First thing you wanna do, after you get your cases all cleaned up, is to press all your new seals in, and I just used an assortment of like big sockets and a hammer and put them in there. Once you get those in, the first thing you wanna do is put your crank in. What I'll do is I'll just temporarily install this side cover, because it lets me lay the thing on the bench and not have the crank hit anything when it comes in. So first things first, you take your crank, and I like to come in here where this groove is and just squirt a little 2-stroke oil in there to lube it up for startup. Then you make sure your rod is facing out of the hole where the jug would go. And some bikes you have to press them in, some bikes you have to pull them in. This bike just drops in the bearing. So there, that's that all the way in. After you get your crank in, make sure it still spins free, which this is fine. And we're gonna move on to the transmission side now. So I got my new gear here for the transmission. We gotta install it on the main shaft, but it's this one right here all the way at the bottom. So we gotta take it apart. I like to lay my parts out kind of in the way that they come off the transmission or the shaft. That way when I go to put them back together, I've kind of got an idea. So pay attention to your service manual. If you don't have one, pay real close attention to how they come off. But in your service manual, it usually will say which direction they gotta come off at. Once you got your gears built, they all kind of have to go into the transmission at one time. So take and prop the case up so nothing can hit on the backside. Then I'll start this one in the transmission. Then you get your other one and kind of mesh them together. And try to get them to go in at the same time here without trapping your fingers. So you take your first shift fork and slide it into the gear and kind of push it off to the side. Then you do your other two, do the same thing. Get it in there and off to the side. So get that on there and off to the side. Then next is your shift drum. That goes in the case. Then you can swing your first shift fork. Sometimes you have to pick up on the gear that is attached to, over into the shift drum. Once that's in the shift drum, you can install your guide rod. And make sure you oil and lube these up before you put them in. So you get your first one in, then you can do your second one. Take your lower one. And again, sometimes you got to pick up on the gear. Get it into place. Take your upper one, get it into place. Then install your shift rod down into the case. Now, you make sure that all your little thrust washers and stuff didn't get misplaced and that they're still on the transmission. So once that's good to go, make sure your gasket surfaces are good and clean. And then the same with the rod bearing. I like to take and lubricate the crank bearings with a little 2-stroke oil. After you've done that, place your gasket. And on some, where it goes across where the connecting rod goes through, it's attached, so I just cut it. You're going to place that on your cases. Make sure all your bolt holes are lined up. 2 strokes, not so much, but on a lot of 4 strokes, there's oiling holes that go through each case half. So you got to make sure those aren't blocked off. And you get your other case. And you kind of work it over the shafts here. Sometimes it takes a little bit of wiggling to get everything all happy and lined up. Sometimes you got to get a little screwdriver and move the shafts around to get it to drop on there. All right, and it should drop all the way together. Under no circumstances should you have to like suck the side cases together with the bolts. It should go on like all the way flush and touching. All right, so once those are on, we can put our case bolts in. And these are torqued to 6 foot-pounds, so like not a bunch at all. So I'm just gonna do them by feel, by hand. All right, now those are all torqued in. Your bottom end is, for the most part, assembled. Now we just gotta do the clutch, the stator, and a few of the ancillary components. Now, you do wanna make sure all the transmission and the crank and everything still turn free once you get your case halves together. If anything's binding, you need to take them back out and find out why. Once that's together, you can start assembling all the stuff in each side of your case. So here I'm gonna put the primary drive gear, the clutch, the kickstarter, the idler, the whatever you would call it, the governor or the flywheel. For the power valve, it's gonna go back in, all that stuff. It's important once you get your shift selector drum and your detent all put in, make sure you find neutral and see that it's actually neutral. So I'm holding the counter shaft over here and I'm turning the main shaft and they can turn freely. There's no gear grinding, there's no catching. I always take and put a dab of oil on it because it does run in bearings and it does go through a seal there on the other side. And again, make sure all your thrust washers are in place. And your clutch bushing with some oil. Then your clutch hub. Make sure it's all clean and there's no dirt and crap in here. Then your inner clutch hub. Spacer washer first. Once you've got all that done, you start putting your clutch back together. If it was a brand new clutch, you'd want to soak these in oil. But since this is a used one, I'm just going to put it back in. It's already soaked. So I got my Wiseco piston kit for this motor. I'm going to start putting the top end together now. On these, when you open the box, you're going to get a wrist pin bearing depending on which kit you ordered. The wrist pin, the rings, and the piston. Comes in this sweet little Crown Royal bag. And then some instructions and stickers. Gotta have stickers. Alright, so your first step after you pull your piston out of your Crown Royal bag is to mount your rings on it. On a two-stroke, there's going to be locating pins for the ring gap. You got to make sure they're lined up. And before you do this, you got to put your rings in your cylinder and check your end gap on your rings. It's different for every bike, so I didn't show it on camera. After that's done, we're going to put one spiral lock in one side, and then we'll put the other one in after we put the piston on the connecting rod. So right there, you got one of the spiral locks or the circlips in the groove. And then we're going to move on to the next one. Once you have your circlip on the one side, you're going to put a little two-stroke oil in the ring or the pin bore. Smush it around with your finger, and you're going to want to lube your connecting rod bearing or your wrist pin bearing with some two-stroke oil, as well as your connecting rod, and install your bearing. And you're going to lube up your pin. And on most pistons, you can see that in the glare, there's a little arrow that always points to the exhaust port, at least on two strokes. And then you have to put your other circlip in this side. Alright, with your base gasket on, you're gonna put you're gonna put your cylinder on from the top, and you have to squeeze the rings into that chamfer right there on the bottom of the cylinder after it's all lubed up with oil. And make sure your ring gaps are still lined up on your little pins. When you get your gasket set, it comes with a bunch of different base gaskets, and they're all different thicknesses. I saved the original one out of the motor, and it was 22 thousandths measured with a dial caliper. The closest one we had was 20, so we put it in there, and then took a straight edge, wherever the fuck it is. Where'd the thing run off to? Took my precision straight edge here, and just held it here lightly across the deck, and Alan is going to run the cylinder up. And I can feel it just barely kiss it. And the spec is 0 clearance or below, not positive clearance. Craig, who's the local two-stroke guru that I know, and I trust his work a lot. He builds really, really nice race motors for people and ports them. Actually told me just to run the thinnest gasket and let the piston come up into the relief in the cylinder head for more compression and performance. But I want this thing to run on 91 octane and not have to run race gas. So we're gonna go with 0 clearance. It might be a little bit positive, but it's like 1/1000th of an inch, if anything. So we're gonna run it like this. All right, so that's it. We got the top end in. It's all ready to go back in the bike pretty much. I still got to clean up these covers and paint them. They're really scrungy though, so I'm trying to soak them in some degreaser. I think that's about it. I'm just struggling whether or not I want to buy V-Force reeds because this thing has Boysons in it, and Craig said to definitely take the Boysons out and go with stock or the V-Force. So that's pretty much it for the KTM motor. The next time you see it, we're going to be putting it in the bike and doing wheel bearings and tires and sprockets and probably taking it for a test drive. So we'll catch you guys on the next one.